Candace Owens. Candace. You did it again. Candace Owens did everything in her power this week to defame, embarrass, and spit on the name of Big Floyd, as she does. And Candace Owens is a person, in order to understand why she does what she does, you have to know who she is. Like, you know Candace Owens, right? I mean, not for what she's known for, but that kind of person she is. Candace Owens is that girl, and we all know that girl. Candace Owens is that girl. She had a horrific black upbringing and experience. Her mother was pregnant with her when she was 17 years old. So she didn't have a good black experience at the start of her life. She's that girl, you know, that girl who she's too unpopular to hang out with any of the cool girls, and she's too unattractive to date any of the popular guys, and she's kind of that social misfit black girl who gets her grades and takes care of her business in the classroom, but her social life is amongst her fellow black students and kids her age is just absolute trash. Candace Owens is that girl that goes to school and gets her lesson and has these huge ambitions and goals, all for the sole purpose to one day grow up and take a crap on all the black people who she hates, who did her wrong, or who she perceives did her wrong, all the black girls who ever dissed her, all the black men who ever dissed her. And this is Candace Owens' political plight, her political background, her political insight, her political dialogue. Is all basically her revenge on her black experience. It's all her revenge. She is Auntie Ruckus. She is Auntie Ruckus. She's the girl, and I know girls like that. You know, they were the butt of the joke. They were made fun of because of their awkwardness, because of their little skinny chicken legs. The cool girls didn't want to hang out with them because they were socially awkward. They couldn't dance. They weren't the cutest girl, so they watched other girls. They got passed over watching other girls date the black men that she probably had crushes on, so now she crushes on all black men in her political forum. And this is basically her revenge on having such a horrific black experience. This is how she gets you back. You know, you go in sometimes in the certain stores and you see people who went to school with you, and they may have been a little bit cooler than you were, or you know, they may have been the one who had the girls or got the guys, and then you see them later in life and they struggling, and then part of you and you not struggling, and you see them, and it's a kind of a part of you, if you're that kind of person that says, look at you, look where you are, and look where I am. Candace Owens is basically taking it upon herself to do that to every black person who is not in the same arena as she is. She socializes. She's married to a white man. So she checked out on Brothers a long time ago, and her recent rant on Floyd just added more evidence to the fact that she just is so bitter and hurt over her black experience that she has to pass that on. You know, there's some people who've been hurt so bad, they've been bitter so long, they have to pass that on to the next person to feel better. It's like paying it forward, but in reverse. Instead of paying forward great things and things that have happened to you, you pay forward bitterness and hurt, and you push it on to other people. And that's what she does. Look, okay, she come running down a lot of stuff George did in his past. The burglaries, the ordeal with the pregnant woman. And that was bad, and he made some mistakes, and he paid his debt to society. But she made it her business. The first thing she made it her business to do was go and look up all this stuff with the intent to tear down Floyd's name. She made the statement. She said that she's tired of black people pandering to the lowest common denominator. We're always those who take the lowest common denominator and lift them up and make them martyrs. And no other racial group does that. Well, no other racial group does that, Candace, because no other racial group has our plight in America. Generally speaking, we've been made to feel like we're the lowest common denominators in this country because things have been made so hard, particularly for black men, to achieve any kind of success in this country. And I know recently things have changed, but in a historical sense, things have been hard for black men for a really, really long time. She looked into his history and she said he's not a hero. She basically said he's a bad person without even knowing him. And she talked about the things that he did. But let's talk about that for a minute. Anybody who knew Floyd, I knew Floyd from the time I was a freshman at Yates. And what I knew about Floyd was that here's a guy 6'6", big tall guy, pretty scary if you're a little freshman. And he was anything but, and I remember walking through Yates, and there were some guys who tried to bully you. There were some guys who push you up against a locker, like, watch out, little freshman. Floyd was anything but that. I remember the next year, I think we took Mr. Marzafari's class together. It was me, him, Gerald Landy, Quinn Lee, a few other people in that class. And he was just meek. He was quiet. He was, you know, we used to crack and rank on each other all the time. And Floyd would never join in, but he'd just laugh at us. He was not that guy, and I understand some of the things that he did, but what people like Candace Owens needs to acknowledge before you go tearing people down for what they did, especially when you don't know the man. She basically said he was a criminal his whole life. That's a damn lie, okay? He was a two-sport star athlete in his youth, so you don't know what you're talking about. You looked up a few things. You don't know the whole story. You don't know the man's background. You don't know where he came from. Growing up in the CUNY Homes in the 3rd Ward part of town in the crack era wasn't easy, and yet he still was a two-sport star athlete at Jack Yates. But when you have people with the temperament of Floyd, or as I knew him, as many of us knew him growing up, and you see them have unfortunate experiences where they fall into crime or they do certain things, it just speaks to the power of not having a positive environment around you. It speaks to the power of a poverty-stricken environment where you push people to a point that they either have to pretend to be or get down with people who are nothing like them, and be pushed to a point where they have to, or they feel they have to do certain things to survive in an environment, because if they don't, they'll get swallowed up. One thing about being in the hood will make you have to be somebody who deep down in your heart you're not. I grew up in Acres Home, and I'm a pretty mild guy, but I had to fight almost every other day. Because growing up in the hood, if you as skinny as I was, as small as I was, and I started boxing late as a teenager, and many people wouldn't throw hands with me after that because they knew that I was nice. But before that, you had to scrap every day. And it wasn't that you were a mean or nasty person, but it's just that when you're in a certain environment, you have to do what you have to do to survive. And I'm not condoning anything that George did in his past. And he, like again, I said, he paid his debt to society. But we need to acknowledge what poverty and desperation and what the hood and what the projects force people to become. Floyd grew up in the CUNY Homes. there should be no CUNY Homes. There should be no CUNY Homes because black people after World War I should have been able to buy and get property on the GI Bill and other programs just like everybody else. There should be no CUNY Homes because Black Wall Street and other cities like it should have never been blown up. There should be no CUNY Homes because black people should have been allowed a better opportunity, a better education. Black people should have been afforded the opportunity to apply for business loans. There should be no CUNY Homes because black people should not have been denied the opportunity to attend certain universities and colleges. There should be no CUNY Homes because black people's applications should not be passed over because their last names or their first names look like their names of black people. So whenever I see people who fall into situations who come from areas that have been constructed for people who are not wanted, or people who our society basically said, we're not giving you the same opportunity as everybody else, so let us place you in it, whether it's the Marcy projects, whether it's the projects in New Orleans, whether it's the CUNY Homes or any other project. You know, the Queens, I heard Nas talk about the Queensbridge project. All of these projects should never be. They should have never been. We should have been allowed opportunity to own property and land from the start. And one thing I can't stand about certain groups and ethnicities of people, don't try to tell black people how we should act and how we should be acting in our everyday lives when things that should have been done were not done. White people wouldn't have to be afraid of black people if when slavery ended, we were allowed to build homes right next to whites and grow up as one. Could you imagine that? Just one great community, no black community, no white community, no Jewish community, no, just one community. But the powers that be would not let that happen and did everything in their power to keep blacks from doing it of their own accord. You say, okay, we can't live next to you, cool. We've seen what you do. We know how to farm. We know how to cultivate the land. We know how to cook. We know how to do these things. We know how to educate ourselves. So we'll start our own communities and we'll make them prestigious and luxurious. And when that happened, white people said, no, you won't. And all of these activities left us in situations where a large part of our society had to grow up in projects. Not only did that happen, Candace Owens, but you also have to acknowledge the fact that in the 80s, this powerful new drug called crack cocaine just so happened to play a nationwide game of geographical hopscotch, where it hopped past white prosperous communities and landed in every black poor community in America. I mean, literally, crack was like white community, black community, white community, black community. Like it skipped past all the white communities and landed. What drug just basically is dropped onto the country and like is magnetized only to the black communities, which we now know was government driven. So you have all these things that produce these young men, these misguided young men, these young men who have to adapt to their environment, who have to become desperate in their situations and become these people who do things because they're placed in desperate situations. I believe Floyd did some of the things he did because certain situations and certain environments make you desperate. And can I say this? I'm not terrified of a black guy who robs a store for $20 or a black man who robs, carjacks somebody out of desperation. I'm not as afraid of that guy as I am the Wall Street white man who is already rich but will steal just because he can't get enough. That person to me is way more dangerous. Like the guy who robs a liquor store and gets $50 is not as dangerous as the guys who sunk Enron. Like the guy who robs a liquor store maybe on his last leg in a desperate situation is robbing out of desperation. The guys who sunk Enron were all independently wealthy and sunk the company because they could not get enough, which is the story of wealth in America. Well, people who have their own land, but because they can't get enough, come to a new land, kill the Indians, have their land that they stole, establish the 13 colonies, look to the west, have what they have, but say, oh, we don't have enough. Let us go west and let's do it in the name of the Lord and call it manifest destiny and go west. Get more land. Have it all. Well, can't get enough. Oh, let's go south. Let's take California. Let's take Texas. Let's take it from the Mexicans. I'm more afraid of that person. I'm more afraid of the person who's worth $200 million and will lay off 5,000 people of a company so they can get another $100 million bonus at the end of a year. That's who terrifies me. Not the person who robs a liquor store. Not the person who does crime out of desperation, but the person who does crime out of greed and because they have an insatiable appetite for money and power. Candace Owens, she talks about George, and she says that she hates that he's the face of this because he's not a good enough person to be the face of this situation. Which again is something only black people do. Like, from a biblical standpoint, God has never used people with squeaky clean resumes to push humanity forward. Humanity was saved by a raging alcoholic, Noah. The children of Israel were delivered by a convicted murderer, Moses. So why do we think that when God, and ultimately I think everything that happened is in God's plan. When God wants to use someone, he has to use someone that we approve of. We needed somebody to be the king of Israel. Passed over all of David's handsome, statuesque brothers and got the little raggedy one, David, who slept with another man's wife, had him killed, and still was God's man after God's own heart. And nobody condones what Noah, Moses, or David did. But when you're chosen, and God doesn't need your qualifications to choose somebody for whatever purpose he's chosen for. And again, we're the only people who do that. like we won't honor someone because we'll dig into their background and say, oh, they did this, so we can't honor them. Like, white America does not neglect to honor George Washington because he owned slaves. And because he basically broke his own law and transported slaves across the state line to make sure and ensure that they stayed slaves. But they still celebrate George Washington. Still celebrate Thomas Jefferson, even though he was raping and bedding all of his female slaves. Still celebrate Thomas Jefferson. Still celebrate Christopher Columbus, even though he was a lunatic, psychopathic mass murderer who was lost anyway, thought he was going one place and was actually in another, slaughtered all the people. Spain still honors Cortez, another great mass murderer. Belgium still honors Leopold II. Leopold II slaughtered 20s of millions of blacks in the Congo. So many so that there are mountains in the Congo that are not mountains, they're burial grounds full of bodies. To steal all of their land's resources and rubber and make Belgium one of the richest nations on this earth. They still honor that man. So why do we as black people always feel that we have to look past someone's faults or not look past their faults to see their contribution. And then I'll bring you back again to, because I'll have to do this as a pastor, as a man of God, as a man who looks and sees all things spiritually. If you are somebody who feels that a lot of the things that Floyd did in his life were just too much to look past, if you are one of those people, right? Say you saw what Candace Owens said, you didn't know some of the stuff he did and some of the things he was involved in at certain points in his life, and you say, man, that's a lot. Well, if it is a lot and that's too much, then what better way to pay your debt for all that you've done? What better way to pay your debt for the things that you've done than by giving your life for a cause that will change the lives of millions? If Floyd had a past that you just can't let go of, consider this. All of that debt was paid in him losing his life so that the world can change. And if you don't like that it was him, tough luck. If you don't like that that's who God chose, there's nothing you can do about that. I know a lot of us are hurting that his life had to be taken, but change is happening because of someone from Third Ward, Texas, named George Floyd. And all the Candace Owens is out there, you can be as hurt about it as you want. But you can't take your hurt and replace your hurt by hurting us. We're going to honor him. We're going to put his name on walls. We're going to put his name on t-shirts. I put his name on, my wife put his name on my mask. And George Floyd's name is going to be known forever. Magic Johnson knows his name. Michael Irvin knows his name. Dominique Wilkins knows his name. Michael Jordan knows it. These are people who Floyd dreamed to one day know his name. Well, guess what they do? He's famous, baby. You made it.